Hello everyone, it's Miss LaChance back again with another Read Aloud video. Today we will be reading chapters 66 through 70 of our Read Aloud book, The Wild Robot Escapes by Peter Brown. Now the last chapter of our book that we read together was chapter 65 and it was titled The Whale. I mentioned in the last video that was probably my favorite chapter that we have read so far, and I thought it might be fun if in the comment section below, if you would like to comment below your favorite chapter by leaving the chapter title, or if you don't remember the chapter title, you can go ahead and leave a brief description of what happens in that chapter. That would be great. I'm super curious and interested to find out what your favorite chapter has been in our book so far. Chapter 66 is called The New Land, so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the book. Zoom, vroom, shoom! Automobiles were gliding up and down the road, passing fields and forests and clusters of houses. None of the passengers had any idea that a robot and a goose were watching from the weeds. Our friends had been hiding there for some time, waiting for the traffic to clear, but the automobiles kept coming. Roz noticed a drainage pipe that crossed under the road. The pipe was dark and grimy, but the travelers were getting desperate. Moving through this new land was difficult. There were more humans and robots and buildings and roads than ever before. Roz and Brightbill traveled far out of their way in wide circles just to avoid small towns. As the days passed, the scenery looked more familiar to Brightbill. He remembered flying over these lands on his first migration. He knew the towns would only get larger and closer together the farther they went. It would be much faster to sneak through the towns than to continue going around them. So, as night fell, Roz put on some fresh camouflage, and with her son watching from the sky, she crept into a town. Chapter 67 is called The Town, and there's a lovely picture on this page, but I won't show you until we're done reading the page, just because I don't want to spoil anything too soon. So let's go ahead and jump into Chapter 67, The Town. Pookie was a big little dog. Her body was round, her legs were short, her ears were long. Although the dog looked funny, she was serious about protecting her home. She slapped her front paws on the windowsill and stared into the night to make sure all was well outside. But all was not well. A new clump of weeds had mysteriously sprouted in the yard. Pookie needed to take a closer look. The dog whined by the back door until someone let her out. Then she scurried across the porch, down the steps, and over to the mysterious weeds. As Pookie approached, a raspy growl sounded in her throat. "Where did these weeds come from?" she said to herself, sniffing. "They weren't here this afternoon." The weeds rustled in the breeze, and that was enough to set Pookie off. The dog barked and barked and barked, and then astonishingly, the weeds spoke to her in a clear, calm voice. "I am sorry if I disturbed you," said the weeds. Pookie stopped barking. And here's a picture of Pookie. "I was hoping to pass through without being seen," said the weeds, "but you saw me. You are a very good guard dog." Pookie resumed barking. "No, no, no, shh," said the weeds. "Please stop barking." But there was no stopping Pookie. The clump of weeds decided to move. Like some sort of monster, the weeds rose up on two legs and leaped over the fence into the neighboring yard. Felix had heard Pookie barking next door, and when the weedy monster landed in his yard, he started barking as well. So the monster kept going, leaping fences from one yard to the next. Every house in the neighborhood seemed to have a dog, and they all began barking about the weedy monster. Reader, you and I know the monster was actually our robot in disguise, but the dogs never did figure out what happened that night. Roz finally slunk into the shadows behind a school building and listened as the chorus of dogs settled down. "That didn't go very well," said the goose as he landed behind his mother. "No, it did not," said the robot. "This will only be tougher in daylight." "I know. I will have to try something else." Early the next morning, the sun started rising, automobiles started driving, robots started running errands. However, one of those robots was not like the rest. Roz had picked every speck of dirt from her body, and now she blended in with all the normal robots going about their normal morning routines. Our robot was hiding in plain sight. Roz marched through town, turning left and right and down the streets, as Brightbill watched from above. Along the way, she passed a wide variety of robots all going about their business. There was even another Rosm robot marching around who looked identical to our Roz, except she was shinier and had a different unit number. It occurred to Rosm Unit 7134 that if anyone noticed her unit number, it might bring a swift response from the Recos. But as she continued past houses and shops and humans and robots, there didn't seem to be any danger. Everything was going smoothly until she heard an airship flying over the town. Our robot felt something like dread as she waited for a sleek white ship to appear. If the Recos found her now, there would be no escape. But the ship that appeared wasn't white, it wasn't black, and it flew over without stopping. Roz was safe, and suddenly she was dreaming about airships. Returning to the island would be so easy with a ship. She and Brightbill would climb in, fire up the engines, and be home in no time at all. But it was an impossible dream. There was no safe way for our robot to get an airship. She had to find some other way home. First, she had to find her way out of this town. So Roz focused on her surroundings and continued marching along the sidewalks just like a normal robot. And chapter 68 is called The Station. At the edge of town, where the houses stopped and the countryside began, was a small train station. 2 platforms sat on either side of the tracks. Humans and robots were standing around waiting for the next train to arrive. Nobody paid any attention to our robot as she calmly marched past. When Roz was safely out of sight, she slipped into the woods where Brightbill was hiding. The goose opened his mouth to speak, but the station bells started ringing. Speeding down the tracks was a passenger train. A whistle blew, the train gently braked, and a minute later it came to a smooth stop at the station. Oh my goodness, as I'm reading this page right now, there is a train going by my house. I wanted to pause for it. Oh, if you guys heard that, there is a train near my house and it's going by. What a coincidence. As we're reading a chapter about a train station, there is a train going by my house. Anyways, let's continue with the read aloud. Passengers burst out of the train cars while others stepped aboard. The first 9 cars were reserved for humans and had wide windows and comfortable seats. The only robots allowed in those cars were service robots who brought food and drinks to the human passengers. All other robots were confined to the windowless car at the end of the train. "Where's it going?" whispered Brightbill as he peeked out from the brush. "The sign says this is the express train to the city," whispered Roz. The goose turned to his mother. "We have to go past the city to get home. This train could save us a lot of time. We should hop on." The robot turned to her son. "I do not think that is a good idea. It is too risky." "Ma, I watched you walk through town and no one even noticed you. We'll be fine. Let's follow these robots into the last car. I'll find a hiding spot and we'll be in the city before you know it." Roz had questions. How large is the city? Do you know where to go? What if we get lost? "Relax, Ma. My pigeon friend Grey Beak lives there. She'll be happy to help us." A voice called out from the loudspeaker, and the last couple of passengers hurried along the platform. "I'm going to check it out," said Brightbill. With a quick flurry of wing beats, he fluttered out from the brush and onto the roof of the last train car. The goose lowered his long neck and looked through the open door. Then he looked back and waved for his mother to join him. A whistle blew and Brightbill waved faster. Roz had little choice, so she slipped out of the trees and marched onto the platform. "In here, Ma!" Brightbill pointed down to the doorway beneath him. Everything about this situation made our robot nervous. Her survival instincts were tingling. Roz looked up at her son on the roof, and then she stepped through the train door. But before Brightbill could flutter in behind her, the door slid closed, and the train began to move. And chapter 69 is called The Train. Our robot felt something like panic as the train pulled away from the station. She wanted to break down the door, leap from the train, and find her son. But what could Roz do? She had to act like a normal robot. She had to pretend that nothing was wrong. The train car's interior was a long, windowless room filled with rows and rows of robots. The robots were all facing forward, all standing still. If not for their softly glowing eyes, you might think that they were statues. Some of the robots were perfect and new, but most had scrapes and dents. None more than Rosum Unit 7134. Roz walked down the aisle and stood in the last row, and the train started to accelerate. What do you think that word means, accelerate? If a train is stopped and then it begins to accelerate, what do you think that word means in that context right there? Go ahead and comment in the comment section below if you're interested. Faster and faster it went until it reached its cruising speed. Then it hummed along the tracks, occasionally swinging left or right. It snaked around a curve. With no windows, Roz could only wonder how far she was traveling. She could only wonder about the scenery outside. Mostly, she wondered about her son. Was Brightbill okay? How would she find him? Would they ever see each other again? Of course they would. Brightbill was smart and resourceful. The goose would simply follow the train tracks into the city. Then he would find his pigeon friend, Graybeak, and she would help them reunite. Roz just had to stay out of trouble. Time crawled by. What do you think that figure of speech means if time is crawling by? What pace do you think time would be moving at? Go ahead and comment in the comments below if you're interested at taking a guess. The robots gently swayed with the motion of the train. Finally, there was an announcement from the loudspeaker. Next and final stop, Center City Station. A whistle blew and the train braked and slowed and came to a smooth stop. The door slid open and the robots filed out. And here we have a picture of this very long train as it's traveling. The last chapter that we're going to read together today is chapter 70, and it's called The March Through the City. And here we have a picture of the landscape of the city with its tall buildings, skyscrapers. If you look in the background, you might be able to see some clouds in the back, and it looks like the buildings are even taller than the clouds in the back. So that gives us an idea of what kind of city Roz might be finding herself in. If you have ever been to a city that looks like this before, I am very curious to learn where you have traveled. So if you're interested in connecting with this city in some way, please leave the name of your favorite city that you have traveled to before. And if you haven't been to a big city before, I would like you to leave the name of a city that you're interested in visiting at some point in your life. So let's dive into chapter 70, The March Through the City. The main hall of Center City Station was enormous. Wide columns stretched up to an arched ceiling. A huge electronic screen flickered with train schedules. The whole place was bustling with humans and robots, and everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Everyone except Roz. There was our robot standing still in the station while commuters hurried past. She was trying to calculate her next move, and she had to think quickly. You see, a normal robot would never loiter there for too long. Roz needed to do something, anything. And when a crew of Rozm robots marched past in single file, she could think of no better plan than to join the end of the line and pretend to be one of them. She followed the crew through a set of doors, and suddenly they were outside. The city was a blur of activity. Automobiles hummed down the streets, robots marched along the sidewalks, humans talked and laughed and shouted. Buildings towered overhead and above them. Airships buzzed across the sky. I'm thinking back to the first book in this series, The Wild Robot, and I'm finding myself able to compare the difference between the first book in the series and the second book in this series, The Wild Robot Escapes. It seems to me that there's a lot more human activity and other robot activity in this book than in the first book. The first book definitely focused more on natural wildlife, and now in this book, it seems like a theme is human activity and also robot activity. Give me a connection symbol if you're able to connect with that statement right there. Airships. For a moment, Roz was dreaming again about how easily she could get home with an airship. But reality came crashing back when a white triangular ship darted over. It was gone in an instant, disappearing behind the rooftops. But that was not all it took for the robot's survival instincts to flare. Were the Recos searching for Roz or going about some other business? Roz tried to focus on her immediate surroundings. She was still marching behind that crew of robots. With each step, she grew more nervous that they'd notice her tagging along. She wanted to break away, and as they started weaving and shuffling through a crowd of tourists, Roz slowed and stopped, and the robot crew continued on without her. Now Roz was on her own, but she didn't know what to do or where to go. When in doubt, Brightbill had always guided her north, so our robot set off through the city in that direction. While marching northward, Roz passed beautiful boulevards and architecture and gardens and art, and yet she had to ignore it all. She had to act like a normal robot, and a normal robot would never wander the city admiring beautiful things. Wherever Roz looked, she saw normal robots concentrating on their tasks and on nothing else. They ran errands, delivered food, swept sidewalks, cleaned windows, fixed machines, built glorious structures, and did more jobs than you can possibly imagine. Most walked on two legs, but some rolled on wheels or slid up and down the sides of buildings on tracks. The city was a glimmering modern metropolis where humans lived in luxury, all thanks to the tireless work of robots. Roz was marching when the sunlight faded and the city lights brightened. She was marching when the humans went in for the night and the robots continued to work. She was marching when the sun came up and the humans flittered out of their buildings. A new day began in the city, and there was Roz, marching north, blending in, anxiously hoping her son would appear. And with that is the end of chapter 70, The March Through the City. Before I end this video, I have two more questions for you guys. My first question is in the comment section below. If you are interested in responding to this question, I would like you to type out one thing that is positive in this future world where robots do everything for you. And I would also like you to type out something that would be negative about living in this world. If I were to answer that question, obviously the positive thing would be that Life would be a lot more convenient and easy, right? If robots were doing your jobs or tasks that you have to get done in a day for you. Whereas on the negative side, I can see how this would make humans a lot lazier in their day-to-day life if they have to rely on a robot to do their work for them. If something ever happened in the world where suddenly we didn't have this technology anymore and we've relied on these robots to do things for us for so long, we might really struggle living independent lives and knowing how to get things done for ourselves. Anyways, go ahead and comment below if you are interested in thinking of one negative thing and one positive thing about living in this future world where robots do all of the work for us. And the last question I have for all of you is that in the last chapter, the author kept mentioning that Roz was feeling some emotions that were similar to being nervous. I'm going to challenge you in the comment section below to try and think of a synonym for the word nervous. Remember, a synonym is a word that has the same meaning as another word. Anyways, that is all for today's video. In the next video, we will be reading chapters 71 through 75, and chapter 71 is called The Observations. Thank you so much for clicking onto this video and enjoying these last few chapters with me. I will see you in the next video. Bye, friends.